Good morning, everyone, and thank you all that have joined the webinar today. My name is Dr. Karen Maldonado, and I serve as the Director of Education Reform for the Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico. Today's webinar will be conducted in English with simultaneous translation in Spanish. A little bit about today's webinar. It's the second webinar that FOMB is hosting since the announcement by the federal government in September of this year that the Puerto Rico Department of Education, also known as PRDE, would receive $2.2 billion to improve schools in all municipalities, responding to the changing demographics on the island and address the demands for new skills and approaches to education that are necessary at this moment in education and beyond. Our hope is that today's webinar provides a vision for the Puerto Rico Department of Education and the general public with information and insight on how PRDE should consider utilizing FEMA funds to create resiliency in communities that are most vulnerable across the island. You'll hear lessons learned about the importance of community efforts when rebuilding post-disaster and how rebuilding effectively assists with the determination but also the end of generational poverty. Our desire is that PRDE and the government of Puerto Rico are successful in the diverse disbursement of these funds, and that this in turn significantly and positively impacts students and the communities that help to shape their lives. Here's a few things we'd like for you to keep in mind during this webinar. Number one, the session will be recorded and available in the next couple of days on our website, the FOMB website. There will be simultaneous translation for those who are interested in listening to the webinar in Spanish. We'll have 3 panelists, and we would love to hear from you after each panelist presentation. So feel free to type your questions in the chat box. We'll address them. And towards the closing of the webinar, there'll be a little bit more time for more questions. And then if there are any additional comments and questions that we don't have time to address, please feel free to email our communications team at communications@promesa.gov. The email address will also be available in the chat box. So let me just share before we dive in a little bit about our panelists, and then I'll go into detail before each of their presentations. First, we'll hear from Greg Eaton, who serves as Senior Manager at Ernst & Young Insurance and Federal Claim Services. We'll then hear from panelist Michael Mirisola, who is the Director of External Affairs of the New York City School Construction Authority. And lastly, and of equal importance, we'll hear from Eduardo Carrera, who serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the Boys and Girls Club of Puerto Rico, the Menti School, and El Instituto de Desarrollo de la Juventud. Okay, well now I'll take a moment and before Greg starts us off, I'd like to just give a little bit further introduction on Greg. Greg is a former federal coordinating officer, which is the senior FEMA official leading presidentially declared disasters and the former recovery division director in FEMA Region 6. In FEMA Region 6, he was responsible for the public assistance and individual assistance program, as well as the declaration process. Since retiring from FEMA, he assisted in drafting Build Back Better, which was submitted to Congress in November of 2017 and resulted in the largest the CDBG DR grant in our nation's history. He also assisted in the initial establishment of COR3 and in the development of the recovery plan, which is a comprehensive $139 billion plan for the transformation and innovation of Puerto Rico in the wake of Hurricane Maria. Greg, I will pass it over to you, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, Karen, and it's certainly an honor to be here this morning. As we look at PRD, and I'm going to use this word often through my brief remarks, and then looking ahead, this is really an opportunity. From the very beginning in the drafting of the recovery plan, resiliency has been a tremendous part of this plan, and incorporating resiliency into everything that we do. And these are direct quotes from the plan. and then looking at how we are more resilient to disasters in the future. Then even as you look to the vision, which is the guiding principle in which we're building on the plan, and it was looking at a resilient, state-of-the-art infrastructure, safe, educated, and healthy, sustainable society. Those are all core components of the plan, and bringing all those pieces together is really what we tried to do in development of the plan. But certainly 3 years later, and still with that core principle in mind. Next slide, please. Karen had mentioned the 428 grant, and that's a $2.8 billion grant, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But it really is, as you look to the future in building a resilient infrastructure across the Department of Education, it's really putting multiple pieces together. On the FEMA side, talk about briefly two programs: one, the Public Assistance Program, and two, the Hazard Mitigation Program. The Public Assistance Program is geared for state and local, private nonprofits, government entities. And in that component, there's a provision for permanent work. And that's really what we're talking about today. The Section 428 grant, which Section 428 is part of the Stafford Act, and talks about the ability in which we can move forward in a pilot program that was really created after Hurricane Sandy. Also within the public assistance program, there's mitigation opportunities. And the 406 mitigation program, which is the core of the Public Assistance Authority, is really restoring and repairing and then making more resilient in mitigating damaged elements of a building. And looking at how we can build back stronger, and really it's a core focus of FEMA and these grant dollars. And then the other program is the Hazard Mitigation Program, and that's traditionally repairing, making more resilient, mitigating the undamaged elements of a building, as we talk about today, and does a lot of other things, but really what we're talking about in today's discussion. So as an example is if you had part of a building destroyed or damaged, and you replace a couple windows and make the windows stronger by putting in stronger hurricane resistant glass and those type things. The damaged elements would be the 406 program, but then another part of the building was undamaged, and then you're putting in those stronger windows in that part of the building, the undamaged elements, and that would be the hazard mitigation program. It's a very simple example. Community Development Block Grant Program, again, as Karen said, that's the largest allocation in the history of our country, over $20 billion. It's a program that's run through the HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and we are currently, as far as in the employment of those dollars, the action plan for the CDBG-DR, the disaster recovery component, is improved, and actually we currently are under the amendment number 4 has been approved, and amendment number 5 is currently under review at HUD. And then something new over the last couple of years is the CDBG mitigation program, and that action plan has been submitted to HUD for approval. The biggest component of the discussion today is where this fits into the overall picture is the cost share requirements. The cost share for Maria is 90-10 for permanent work, so that requirement is $229 million. So a big component of the overall picture. I won't really touch on other funding, but there's a lot of other funding that comes into play in order to build, again, a more resilient state-of-the-art Department of Education. Next slide, please. Looking at just the more details on the 428 grant. The spirit of the program and what it's trying to do is increasing the flexibility of administration of assistance. And it's trying to expedite as far as the applicant, the PRDE, in order to rebuild. And I realize expediting seems a little odd as we're several years into this, and this grant was just approved a couple months ago, but this is a significant step. It's never really been done in this fashion before. So recovery is really, again, an opportunity to look at this grant in order to use the authorities of the grant of the 2.2 billion in looking at the current structure and then imagining and reimagining what the future looks like. So if there's 1,100 buildings and the school system and right sizing the school system would be 700 buildings, this gives us the flexibility to do that, to move money around as we need to recover. The one thing that's not included in the grant, which is a key point, is 406 mitigation. And that has to be approved as we work through on a case-by-case basis. So every building, we would look at ways to mitigate. The next slide, please. And there's some couple other components in that mitigation as we look at that through different, again, Sandy Recovery Reform Act got us the 428 program in order to the overall context of this grant. But then the Bipartisan Budget Act gave us some different authorities and going even a step further without looking at pre-disaster condition. That's a significant step. As FEMA typically will look at pre-disaster condition, and if a building was in disrepair, as an example, in the beginning, it may limit eligibility as far as the grant, and so this took that step away, which is significant in the rebuilding and the overall part of this grant. The other piece too, which is unique, is and new and certainly very exciting, is looking at the parts of the buildings that were not damaged by the disaster, but necessary to restore as far as the overall disaster damage components being repaired, restored, rebuilt. So it gives flexibility there, and then 406 mitigation. Mitigation is a tremendous, I think it's one of the best things that FEMA does. And so really it's this opportunity to build back stronger. Next slide, please. Some of the details of the road ahead. The initial work plan is that 90 days is next week. So that initial plan as far as what the implementation of this $2.2 billion is due here before the end of the year. Throughout the program, there's regular updates that are required. And then the building of each scope of work specific to the building is an important part of the process. And really, that's that strategy that we're talking about, in putting all those funding pieces together, because it's really going to take all of them. As we look at the mitigation components, the public assistance program, and then certainly other grants. Work must be approved before it begins. This is a critical part of all federal grants, public assistance program here too. And the environmental historic preservation component of it certainly can jeopardize funding without that approval first. Again, just a key step in managing the grant. Next slide, please. Talked a little bit about just the current state and the future state, and what the slide just tries to show is the current state is you had 6 buildings as an example, and you really needed 4 to support the overall effort. This gives you the ability to do that. That was prior to the Section 428 program. This was very difficult to do. Now it's considerably easy, because you look at that $2.2 billion as a bucket of money, if you will, and then you're using that in a capped grant in order to build what you need to build. And then you can supplement it with other sources of funding as well. Again, we talked about the cost share, but then some other components as well as we work through this process. So I think some of the key points, it gives us an ability to right-size the school infrastructure, right-sizing the school system for the current population of students, a tremendous opportunity with mitigation in the different mitigation programs, and then an opportunity really to establish codes and standards that can be used both now as we rebuild, but going forward as well. Those code and standards are such an important part of across a nation. whether it's in floodplain management and establishing codes and standards is across those lines, or just the actual rebuilding. And it's the resilience of that across the nation really is extremely evident. And then just one note on the 404 mitigation program. Studies show that every dollar invested yields $7 in savings in building that stronger, resilient infrastructure across our country. Next slide, please. Just to wrap up, a couple things as far as the opportunity, and really it is an opportunity just to upgrade school infrastructure and support both resiliency and sustainability. Codes and standards, again, we touched on that, but just building to a code and standard that can support both now and in the future is a critical part of this step. And then supporting the whole community in standards and all access needs and building that into the standards that we're rebuilding. It's an opportunity for a Storm Smart School, which is a term that was used in the recovery plan, and really education is resilient, another component from the recovery plan and looking at the future. This is truly an opportunity to build a more resilient school system. So I'm really excited about the future and seeing these steps and this opportunity and funding put to use and good use in building a stronger Department of Education. So Karen, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Greg. Quite informative. We have a question from our audience member that I believe our associate Carla is going to share.
Hi, Greg. What proportion of the overall funding is for school reconstruction versus improving education, regardless of the buildings? Considering the post-COVID reality of remote schooling, reduced on-site learning, etc., what is the consideration for improving the educational environment versus the physical school infrastructure?
So the public assistance program in the hazard mitigation, it is solely focused on infrastructure. As we look at the current grant of the $2.2 billion, it is 100% focused on infrastructure and building a stronger, more resilient infrastructure. The COVID environment in which we live today, and that is a declared disaster in Puerto Rico, but across the country, as we all know, every state has a major disaster declaration. Every territory and several tribes also have a major disaster declaration as well. As you look at the FEMA Public Assistance Program, in Category B is authorized under the COVID events for emergency work. So it really doesn't fit into the remote learning and all those components that are required in the environment in which we live today. And keep in mind, there's never been a pandemic declaration until March 13th, to when every state received an emergency declaration, and then subsequently a major disaster declaration. There are other funding sources, though, that do fit into that. There's other grants that can support the remote learning component. But then again, I think it's really putting those different pieces of funding together, whether it's through foundations, philanthropic funding opportunities. The FCC has some remote learning, remote opportunities, both on the medical side, education, and other entities. So it's putting together all those pieces. I realize that was a long-winded answer, but it's a great question and a complex question. So it's really putting those pieces together across the different funding sources to support the future.
Thank you, Greg. We are now going to turn it over to Michael Mirisola. Michael is the Director of External Affairs for the New York City School Construction Authority. He has worked with New York City School Construction Authority for over 20 years, first as a Community Affairs Manager for the Borough of Manhattan, and now as a Director of External Affairs for the entire city. As part of his responsibilities for the SEA, he supervises a staff of representatives who interact with all community groups, elected officials, and schools to allow the agency to build and restore approximately 1,500 school buildings. Continually monitoring community concerns, and he keeps all parties informed on planned projects, as well as the progress of his work. Michael was a member of Community Board 2 in New York City, a member of the Community Advisory Board as well, and sat on several boards that are focused on youth sports leagues. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. I'll turn it over to you. Michael, you're on mute.
Excuse me. I found Gregory's presentation in the way it's going to meld into mine really helpful to me. So I want to start off with just a basic premise, if we can, about why we do what we do. So I found this quote that said, the underlying principle of community relations is that when a government agency accepts its responsibility and takes an active interest in the well-being of its community, it gains a number of long-term benefits in terms of community support, loyalty, and fostering goodwill. I'd like to add one more thing, and it's pretty straightforward and simple. It also makes the job go faster and easier, and sometimes makes the job possible. Next screen. So to begin with, when I heard Greg speaking about the community and flexibility and opportunities and all of those those catchphrases and words, I think it comes right into what we have to consider when we're trying to move projects through. And so the first thing we need to do is to decide who is the community, and that's very difficult at times. It's simple with schools. At the top of the pyramid, we have parents and children, and staff, administration, neighborhood residents, unions, elected officials, groups who may use the facility. Each of these, however, has very different needs and perspectives and priorities. If we got all of those folks in a room, every one of them would say, we're here for the kids. And we are. But how we get to that end is always difficult and different. And like I say to my staff, everybody who interacts with the child during the child's day, and everyone who we interact with in the course of our work, has a different idea of what a good day is. A custodian wants to get his or her school clean and ready for school the next day. The neighbors want a good night's sleep. The community group wants to make sure that whatever we're leaving behind makes it easier and more possible for them to use that building. And of course, the administration wants and parents want a safe and clean and good environment for the schools and their children. So what do? The first thing we do is we have to listen. And we have to find out how people feel. And sometimes this is just letting them tell us in their own words what they're bringing to the table. We always must accept, and I don't know about your history, but I know that 20 years ago when I came on the scene for the SCA, we had some problems. We had some projects that never went well. We were a brand new agency. We were working through some very difficult times and learning. And we were following up from a previous agency that did not have a stellar record. But we took it one day at a time, and we tried to establish trust with our community. So you must accept that every person that comes to the table is going to have, again, a different perspective and a different willingness to cooperate. So you must understand those people, understand where they're coming from, and find out what it is they want you to accomplish. When Greg was talking about the whole community and their access and their needs, the whole community's access and their needs is different from every element of that community. So try to understand where they're coming from, and then think about what is the real goal of your project. Next, please. And as I was listening to Gregory's presentation, I was struck by all of the limitations he has. all of the limitations that FEMA will put on you, all of the $2.2 billion sounds like a lot of money. It's not. It goes very, very quickly. But when we go into a community and they hear $2 billion, their eyes light up and their ears perk up and they say, oh, this is it. This is when we're going to get everything we ever wanted. So you need to explain those limitations very clearly, carefully, and have somebody translate them to just basic Spanish and English. Try and understand, make them understand what your true limitations are. Fulfilling needs. You know, given all the limitations that these projects will have, and we all understand they're tremendous, there are times when you can have some flexibility that can satisfy a community or a group's or a person's needs that will go a tremendous way in building good faith and making them and causing to understand that you're all on the same sides. Karen and I were talking the other day, and I just said, you know, I just came from a meeting in an area of New York City called the Rockaways. The Rockaways were destroyed by Superstorm Sandy. We are finally getting to the point where we are going to completely take down their old building and put up a brand new one. It had taken a lot of community meetings. It took a lot of back and forth in time. And finally, we're getting down to the point where we're finalizing our design and we're ready to go into construction. One of the needs that those folks showed us, and you would think that it would be something that would be standard operating procedure given this situation, but it wasn't. They wanted a generator to protect them in the case the school was hit again. Some folks on the architecture and engineering side rightly said, hey, you know, we're saving a lot of money here and it's not necessary according to the code. But sometimes those rules and regulations need to be bent just a little bit because we're dealing with a community that in the next storm will be hurt again. Hopefully not as bad, but hurt again. The last thing we want to do is have this beautiful new school high above the floodplain, sitting there like a beacon when folks are in desperate need and say, sorry, you can't come in because we don't have electricity. So that was an easy, what you'd think would be a no-brainer. And it was something we're able to provide for the school, which will give us not only allowing us to do the right thing, allowing us also to meet the needs of the community and to establish trust. They believe now that we are on their side, which is what our goal has to be always. We have to establish and explain that we're all on the same side, even with all our limitations. So we're incorporating these issues and solutions in projects. As I said, embedded into the master plan provides a smoother, faster project as well as it produces long-term benefits of trust. When we establish those situations, we had another community meeting just with those folks just a couple of nights ago. And we were trying to anticipate all the problems and all the things that they were going to bring up and all the things we were not going to be able to satisfy. And I was amazed at how smooth that meeting went. And I got on the phone with the person that I have in that district. And I said to her, I said, Danielle, that's because of you. That's because of the time and the effort and the work that you've put in the last couple of years. And these folks trust that what we're doing is for their benefit and that we're on their side. I said, otherwise, there were so many potholes and bumps along the way that could have gone bad. And because all they could do was praise her and all of her work over the years. And that paid off, allowing us to move this project immediately into construction without having to go back to the drawing board. Problems will arise. And it's something I've told my school communities over and over again. When they come to me and they said, you know, the last time you folks were here, we didn't get what we wanted. We didn't do this, you didn't do that, somebody did. I said, stop, folks. I'm going to guarantee you there are going to be problems on this construction project. That's without a doubt. I'm also going to guarantee to you that I will respond immediately within 24 hours. It's sometimes when government is concerned, People are amazed that someone just takes the time to pick up a phone. And it's really amazing to me because I come from my previous life. Before my 20 years here, I came from the private sector where I ran my own business. And I consider my constituents now to be my customers. Granted, they can't go to another school construction authority, but I do consider them to be my customers, and I want them to be satisfied as best I can. Next slide. Is there anything else? Is that it? Okay, so the benefits. The project achieves its goal. We satisfy essential community needs. Remember, I said essential. The community assumes that the intent is honest. Cooperation will be the rule, and folks, from a purely mercenary point of view, the project will move more quickly. Why is this different than disasters? It's not. It's just community relation on steroids. Community relations during a disaster release situation is even more important than ever. Remember, community needs are multiplied. The projects, as Greg said, must be fast-tracked. Cooperation is essential, and people are even more desperate and more tired than ever. So you must be more patient than ever with them and try to understand where they're coming from. I think that's all I got.
Thank you so much, Michael. I wanted to ask you two questions. The first one is around trust. How would you advise PRDE or any district to start establishing trust with the community?
Listen first. Go in and take the time to listen. You will get there'll be a lot of baggage, there's a lot of water under the bridge, and people will want you to know that they are either pleased or in many cases not very pleased with how things have gone in the past. So the first thing you have to do is honestly listen. Take notes, take them back, get back to people with things and answer their questions promptly if you can. If you can't, tell them that. Mm-hmm. And each time I go and I solve a little problem for someone, I look at it as having a chip in my pocket. And I take it and I don't bring it up and out again, but I know and they know that I'm for them. And when I moved out of the community relations post in Manhattan several years ago, I went and spoke to all of my school communities and tell them I'd be moving on, but I would be there and I was assigning someone else, and that I would always be there to pick up the phone. And several of my principals turned to me and said, you know, I got to say about you, you may not have told me what I wanted to hear, but you always told me the truth and you did it quickly. Just be honest. Be as honest as you possibly can. The vast majority of your constituents will be reasonable people who will understand your limitations, but they have to hear it from you. So that would be that's where you start. And then you build that trust as time goes by. And I understand that we don't have a lot of time here, but you must quickly establish that rapport and that communication and keep it open.
So it sounds like you are saying it goes beyond building the trust, but it also asks to establish transparency with the community.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. You must be transparent, never lie, God forbid, and tell them where you're coming from and say, you know, I have communities all over the city who want and need things that I cannot provide. And I'm going to be honest, we do a yearly group of meetings, and I'm doing that now. And one community every year, beat me up, just beat me up. And finally, one year, I guess it was 10:30 at night. And I just finally, came time for me to talk. And I just said to them, finally, I said, you're right. You need all of these things. Mm-hmm. Every child in the city should have everything that you are asking for, but we have a limited budget and we have children all over the city with such needs. And what we have to do as an agency is prioritize. And sometimes yours don't come up to the top and sometimes they will. And what I want to do is make you understand that we are looking out for all of the kids throughout this city. 1.5 million of them come to our schools, and we have to prioritize. Be honest. Just be honest. Don't try and, spin it. It's not going to work. Just be honest.
Yeah, that also, thank you for that response. It leads me to my next question. And so when you were talking about Superstorm Sandy and having conversations and involving the community, and one could make the assumption, incorrect, but the assumption that, why would I involve the community? What would they know about FEMA dollars? What would be the value in that? If someone were to say that to you, what would be your response?
You should involve the community so that they know help is on the way. You should involve the community because you are going to need their assistance and buy-in. You are going to need their guidance at times to tell you that, you're fixing this, but that is really more important to us as a community, and here's why. And if you can, you make that change. And if you can't, you explain you cannot. But community buy-in, I don't know how it is in Puerto Rico, but it is in New York City, is incredibly important because the community has an ability to just, frankly, again, mercenary, slow things down. They will bring you back. They will ask their elected officials to become involved. And also, you don't want to do something that, like in the medical profession, do no harm. Sometimes we think we know exactly what a community needs, and sometimes we can't, we're wrong. Mm-hmm. You have to be a little humble occasionally and say, I really need to listen to find out what it is these folks now sometimes, and they'll come to you with things that, yeah, it would be important if this were not a disaster, but it's not at this moment, and here is why, and I'm sorry, again, be honest. Here are my limitations, and here's what we can do, and here's what we cannot do. But you need the community support and buy-in because they'll give you important information. They'll make it possible for you to move this project along so much faster and so much easier. And it pays dividends for years and years and years to come.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
We're now going to move into Eduardo Carrera. Eduardo is the CEO of Boys and Girls Clubs of Puerto Rico, Vimenti, and the Youth Development Instituto of Puerto Rico. He is focused on system thinking to address broad challenges such as child poverty in Puerto Rico with a multi-sector approach. His vision, education, professional experience, passion, and enthusiasm have been recognized in international forums for the past 2 years as a presenter in the Mission-Driven Management Summit at the World Federation of Youth Clubs. In addition, he is a member of the Community Advisory Group of Federal Reserve of New York, and he serves as the president of board of directors of Vimenti Schools. Thank you so much, Eduardo, for joining us today. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry.
There you go.
Again.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Saludos. Thank you, Greg and Michael and Karen, for this important space. We have made it a habit of having more questions than answers because the problem in Puerto Rico definitely is an extreme complexity that goes beyond the immediate natural disasters. And for that, we go back always to a phrase of begin with the end in mind. And to begin it with the end in mind, it's important to ask few questions. And for us, some of those guiding questions are, first of all, what is really going on in here? And that we have informed the work through data. And if we really, for 1 second, step back and look at Puerto Rico from a magnifying glass and ask that question, what is really going on here? This illustration paints a picture. In Puerto Rico today, 58% of the children live below poverty. And for those children, it's highly likely that they would remain in poverty for the remaining of their life, when we have over 45% of adults living in poverty. So for us, when we look at how is that system producing results for the island, we see a system that really is geared today to produce low levels of outputs and productivity. And why is that important right now? Because we have approached, or we have heard from some of our leadership, the approach to mitigation and the approach to recovery. And it sounds like we are approaching it from the brick and mortar perspective. And this is a unique opportunity because after the storms, we took a specific work on evaluating and analyzing the impact of the storm in the most vulnerable populations. And the reality is that the cost of the recovery of Puerto Rico is so high because most of the population in Puerto Rico live in precarious economic conditions. And if we really don't step back and start thinking about population and people as a way of mitigating the effects of these and future disasters, we will miss a mark. So while there's a lot of funding out there with some big restrictions, we are challenging everybody right now to really think about what is the end in mind? What is the result that we want to accomplish? And with that, we have to go back to, in our case, our mission of eradicating child poverty in the island. And when we start thinking about the cost and the annual cost of child poverty today, which is about $4.4 billion, that's twice as much of money that we have to rebuild these schools. And we think that this is a lot of resources. So for us, a vision starts basically flipping this equation and start thinking about, this is the results that the system is producing now. So what kind of education program, education model we have to put together in our low income communities first to help our families that are being exposed to crime, to toxic stress, to illnesses that are preventable, for providing access to high quality education that will allow those adults to become productive. And to us, that is the guiding vision that really goes before any reconstruction brick and mortar plan that we should be putting together. So for years now, we have been in the island for 53 years. We have challenged ourselves on how you make this a reality for our communities. And I want to share with you a model that we are implementing in one of our communities where we had a footprint now of 50 years. And this is a model that is geared to take that aspiration of increasing productivity and making it tangible for families. And basically what we are proposing is a one-stop shop that combines generations, combine the children, youth, and their families into a space where they can have opportunities to increase. The ultimate goal is to increase their capacity to move up the ladder in terms of the economic conditions, because for us that's the biggest hindrance for our growth as an island. And when we think about what type of opportunities we want to provide our families and children, definitely we think about aligning those opportunities to industry. It's estimated that over 75% of the jobs of the next 20 years have not been invented yet. So we know that there's going to be a challenge for our families to connect to jobs that they don't even know that exist. And we know that if we want to move our country into more productivity, we're going to have to be certain to offer education opportunities not only for K-12 students. We know that our population will have to be re-equipped to be able to be productive. And for us, that changes the equation of how to approach school. Because for us, school as the concept that we know is for K to 12. And what we are saying is that K to 12 is an important factor of this equation. But if we want to increase productivity for our island, we need to rethink our educational program. And an educational program should target those low-income families that need to have a space, a platform from where they will learn together. And when you have been involved in work with families, you know that low-income families need specific supports. So it is not about having pretty classrooms and good curriculum. That also requires that we provide social services, that we provide health services, and definitely that we bring economic opportunities to these communities. If you, and some of you have had the pleasure, I would say, to visit our island, and if you have spent some time in some of our most vulnerable communities, you really can quickly see deserts of opportunity. And it's easy from the rhetoric to say, these people should want to get better. These people should want to have to work. These people should want to have better opportunities for kids. But when your reality speak to a opportunity desert, is it's a little bit challenging to match your dreams with your reality. So part of what we're saying is that this type of centers or this type of approach should be replicated, especially in some of the areas that have been the hardest hit by disasters and by the dynamics of economics. So what that looks like in terms of planning for a facility, these are actual drawings from a building that we are currently in the pre-development phase. This is located in San Juan. This is right now an abandoned school building, 90,000 square foot. And what we are proposing is that that will be a place for a permanent K-12 school, alongside with a health clinic, a workforce development center, and a business incubator area. And that is a growth of basically what we have been implementing on a smaller scale in a 20,000 square foot facility today that we use. And we believe that when we think about how we are going to utilize all of this recovery funding and all the funding that are available right now for mitigating other disasters, we need to start thinking about what is the result that we want from that community. And these buildings then need to reflect that vision. And there's gonna be an opportunity, like Greg said, that we're gonna have to match funding to that vision. But I am very concerned that we're talking about recovery and response from the brick and mortar. And we have been there before. We have been able to fix some of our schools in the past, but we have missed an opportunity to paint a picture of what is the outcome that we want for our students. And in this case, we are challenging that we can miss the opportunity to think about what is the outcome that we want for our people as a workforce development strategy. So with that, I could be here showing you some other things, but I think it will be important to share with you from a family that was basically that graphic that we saw, a fourth generation mom that have not been able to break that cycle of poverty, and how she talks about receiving these type of services under one-stop shop and how that is influencing her life. So I'm gonna leave you with a testimonial that would bring to life some of the components that we talk. And I want to make sure that you're seeing the screen right now, right?
It's still black, but oh, there you go. Yes, yes, thank you.
Vivía en residencia en el Conocí a Liberty por una campaña que hicieron aquí Steven, junto a mis hijos, es que mi por lo menos mi nene grande, que entró en kinder, él entró sin poder hablar, no habla muy bien, por más del habla, y ahora que está en kinder, es que lo pare, todo el tiempo conversa, siempre está expresándose, toma su terapia, nunca falla en eso. Primero, trabaja en familia, y desde que llegué, rápido me asignaron una caja social que me ayudó a lograr mi meta, primero tomé la situación de qué es lo que yo quiero, qué meta yo quiero lograr, y ahí vamos trabajando, cómo ubicarme, y ahí me hicieron conocer sobre la oportunidad de empleabilidad, y ¿verdad? Me fue muy bien, todo lo que aprendí, la vestimenta, cómo hacer una entrevista, que es lo más difícil para poder hacer un trabajo. Gracias a eso también conseguí un trabajo que me gusta mucho, que es la agencia de trabajar con las personas, uno en la mañana y uno en la tarde. También gracias a mi mente pude conseguir mi casita, de 4 cuartos, vivo cómoda, tienen que tener un patio que les encanta, pueden jugar, las maestras están pendientes, no tienen que llamar, me llaman para explicarme las tareas, lo que se les ha atrasado. También tienen un 1 a 1, donde mi niña está con su maestra y ella le explica en un tiempo determinado todo lo que él no había entendido para que lo aprenda y si darle seguimiento. Desde que llegué me apoyaron en situaciones traumáticas, donde me hicieron dar cuenta que mi prioridad eran mis hijos y yo, que yo voy a salir adelante, que no tenía que rendir, y yo voy a dar todo el apoyo necesario para yo lograr la política. A pesar del COVID, que para muchas familias ha sido difícil, mi mente se mantuvo firme y empezaron clases normales en agosto, ofreciendo tabletas para que pudieran tener una educación continua y pudieran pasar de grado.
Thank you so much for sharing the video, Eduardo. It's really great to not just talk about families, but hear them and see them in action. So we really appreciate that as well. I know we have some questions. Do you have another slide or can we move to questions, Eduardo?
Yes, we can go to questions.
Thank you so much. I know that we have some questions that our team has been looking through. I'll turn it over to you, Carla.
Thank you. Eduardo, given that in Puerto Rico, most school improvement and school rehabilitation projects are completely outsourced and conducted with little participation from PRD, how can we ensure that PRD as a system and its people are the entity and the human resources directly involved with the preparation of the master plan, the community engagement process, and is knowledgeable of the project details so that they can build trusting relations with the community?
So I think that the status quo is that the Department of Education handles the vision for construction with contractors. That is the status quo. And the status quo is producing the type of results that I shared at the beginning of this presentation. My challenge is that if we want to see different results, we need a community involvement like we've never seen before. And the reality is that the ideas of what is important for our communities, the type of design, the type of services that we want, we need to have our citizens more involved in the presentation of those requirements and hold the government accountable. So part of our challenge is that we need to stop looking to the Department of Education and more to some of the community organizing groups that have been in the community for many years and really challenge them that this is the time for community by community to put together what is their expectation of education and hold the government accountable on delivering on those factors. And definitely there will be a time where everybody should be on the table and align into a bigger vision. But right now, it's important that we, as representatives of the people that we serve, really start putting together this concept. If not, we're gonna miss a big opportunity.
Thank you. And now, The next question I'll read is open to all panelists. In the case of Puerto Rico, with the human capital capacity challenges that the state agencies in charge face, would panelists recommend the creation of a special school reconstruction authority with the right capabilities and authorities to lead these major projects throughout the island?
Karen, I can start. But I think this is truly a question for across the group. With the complexity of this, it's going to take some type of key strategic part of the organization, whether it's a special authority or within PRD itself. But it truly is building that strategy, a plan, in ways to move forward and how to move forward. And it's the dynamic of what Eduardo and Michael both talked about, is really bringing all those pieces together in community involvement. Because the outreach, I do agree, is going to be critical. And I liked Michael's point of building that trust, and listening and being honest, and establishing the credibility and maintaining that throughout. So some type of special authority like this may be a good way to go. But certainly, at a minimum, some strategic part in PRD that is really looking at all these concepts and across very complex funding processes. As Eduardo talked about, some of the end state and what that needs to look like, not all those funding sources will get right to that point. It's going to take putting pieces together across the spectrum of all these in order to get to that. So I think it's a good idea to have some organization like that, maybe not a special authority, maybe within PRD, but some group that's focused on this.
I can speak to that, and since we are an authority, and it has worked for us, because we are laser focused on one thing: building the finest schools and maintaining the finest schools that I think we're the best at. Okay, and but we have our limitations. We have one client, and that's the Department of Education and the children in the city of New York. We make certain decisions based upon demographic needs, building conditions. We do a building conditions assessment survey every year of every one of our buildings. That sets the priorities as far as what construction renovation projects we want to accomplish. The needs, we work closely with the Department of Education to determine those, but we have demographic experts. So we are focused on one thing. And I think that is why we have been very successful at what we do. That said, we don't exist in a vacuum. We do have constituents such as Eduardo, who runs boys and girls clubs. We have every one of our buildings is more or less a community center. We have buildings that go 7 days a week. I'm going to say 16, 18, 20 hours a day. So we do have to take into consideration so many different constituents, but we like to think that we like to rely on professionals to give us that information. We don't try to be social service providers. I have this phrase that I use sometimes when people come to me and say, why don't you do this, and with that building? And I say to them, folks, please understand, we build them, they fill them. Okay, we don't fill schools. We don't set programs. We don't make those determinations. We'll build you the best school we can, and we will build it based upon your needs, but you need to tell us what those are.
Thank you, Michael. Now we have another question that will be open to all panelists. Do you have a point of view on how to bridge between what is currently in the works in terms of plans for the use of the FEMA funds and what could or should happen so that all the good advice that has been shared here becomes a reality? For example, what should happen to ensure that the plan for use of FEMA funds is informed by a vision of what we want to be true for our students?
I can start again, and I know again we're probably all three of us want to touch on this as well. The building a strategic plan that really has the end in mind is critical, because as you put the pieces together, there's going to be gaps and unmet needs. That having the plan and that strategic vision of what we're going to look like, or what PRD is going to look like in the end, and then look for the different funding sources to fill those gaps. But much like any significant project along these lines, looking at the different pockets and different funding of what can work where, and what we need to look like, both from a size and building the right size environment, because $2.2 billion, and Michael touched on it as well, sounds like a lot of money today. But through this process, we're probably going to need more money to do what needs to happen. So I think that clear plan, and then also build the transparency within the community and build that trust too.
I would like to add that this is an opportunity really to mobilize multiple sectors of the society in Puerto Rico. For years, we have been listening to human resource directors that are starting to question our ability to produce high caliber staff to fill the jobs that we have in the island. And I believe that this topic of education really has been, at best, delegated to some community groups, but the private sector, industry have also not played a significant role in the island. So this is a moment that will require, like Gregory mentioned and Michael, that for an independent structure to work well, that vision is protected by groups that are outside their own institution. And this is a great opportunity for integrating those voices of the business sector with the voices of the community and community groups.
I think getting everyone together to the table, as Eduardo just said, is really important. It's also very important to have people like Greg say, this is what I have to do. And Greg and Eduardo can say, this is what we really need to do. And then you get together at the table and say, okay, what is the flexibility in this particular program? Because there are certainly limitations. What is where are our flexible points, and where can we slide in what we really need to do and want to do into what we have to do? And then you go back and you set up a list of things that for the future. Where do we want to be in 10 years? Where do we want to be in 15 and 20 years? And how do we set a road on how you get there? With all of these people at the table, you can certainly establish the road, and then you have to go and beat the bushes and try and find the funding to get you there. But again, transparency is incredibly important, because those folks are going to not only buy in for the short term of this $2 billion, they're going to buy in for the long term. They're going to buy in for many, many years to come. And you want them to stay engaged and stay interested and be hopeful and believe that this is a reality this time, that their voice really matters, and show them. We couldn't do everything for you last time. We did do this for you. And this is where we want to go.
And on that note, Eduardo and Michael, should the department start considering developing stronger ties with NGOs that can help build a strong relation between the department and the communities?
Well, without a doubt. I mean, it's fundamental, and it's very, very important. Not only NGOs, but I would say that trade groups and unions, folks have to realize that they're getting an equal opportunity at some of this business. For instance, at the School Construction Authority, we're very proud of our program that makes sure that we use small contractors and bring them along to make sure that they have an interest in making sure that we are successful. And we use trade organizations to make sure that we are not only taking, but we're giving back, and we are using young people and training young people in industries so that they will have careers when they come out. And non-governmental organizations would be extremely important to the process. Bring them in. Someone once told me before I came to the School Construction Authority, when I was just a community agitator, that when I went to her and I said, they're going to just say there's no money. And she looked at me, she said, let me tell you something. I've been doing this for 40 years. There's always money. There's always a way. You just have to find it and set the priorities. And so that's what I would say, without a doubt. Bring everyone to the table and get them to buy in and commit to how we're going to solve your problem.
Well, Carla, I agree with Michael. I would add that for some years we have been challenging the assumption that these have to happen at the Department of Education. To us, this is a cabinet level strategic project for Puerto Rico, because the leverage of what will be needed to pull a project like this for the whole island will require an integration of housing, economic development incentives, obviously the Department of Education, health. So to us, I think that we have give a pass to our past leadership, delegating all of the transformation on the Department of Education, and we have missed an opportunity to integrate other resources and other points of view. So we believe that definitely there have to be an approach where there's a multi-sector table, but we believe that this should be at a highest level of executive cabinet, including definitely the Department of Education as one of the main components.
Yeah. One last question I have here is, how can we incorporate funding for marketing public services with the same girth as private companies? It seems that across the board, a common deficiency or a lack of marketing ability is what plays a role in creating structural challenges to effectively engage citizens.
I'm not a marketing expert, but getting your message out there is incredibly important. It is, you can use these non-governmental organizations. You can use organizations such as Eduardo. If you don't have the funding to do a marketing campaign, you can use these folks. If they're part of the solution, you can use them to be part of your voice, to spread the word that this is real, that this is not a one-shot deal, that it is something that you're working on, and to explain how this is an investment in the community. And everything you're doing here should be an investment in the community and an investment in the future. If your constituents see this as $2 billion, hit, run, goodbye, and I'll never see these folks again, they won't buy in now, and you'll lose them next time. So getting the word out is very, very, very important. I don't know how much flexibility you have with marketing in this grant, but find ways of getting people out and bringing them in and making them as the voice, letting them tell their neighbors that these folks are for real and they're honest and they're transparent and they want to do the right thing for us. So yes, in the ideal circumstance and situation, marketing is a wonderful thing. Do you have that flexibility here? I don't know, but you have other options.
I agree. The other options, in just the community involvement, presentations about the road ahead, much as in the development of the action plans for the CDBG DR programs. That community interaction creates that marketing opportunity and brings those people and resources together. And there's no better advocate for a plan than having everyone involved. And then it becomes the community plan and involves the whole community.
Eduardo's demonstration with that woman telling her story. That's the kind of community, that's what you want. You want people telling their story. You want to see success stories, and you want to get that word out to people so that they'll buy in and they'll believe, and your investment will pay off many, many, many times.
I think there's also a role of asking, like I begin this presentation, asking the questions. We need to engage our leadership into honest reflection of the challenges that we have. And one of the things, especially in the topic that we are dealing with as child poverty, we have made it a point to basically ask the question to every official, to every influential person that get in contact with our movement. We ask how from the Chamber of Commerce you addressing child poverty, and you ask people to reflect on that and to put it out there in their statements. And you have to do the same thing with the public officials. We have to step up the questions on how they're going to address the issue of education for the island, and we have to be consistent, resilient in terms of making sure that we are stubborn on asking that question continuously.
Thank you. I'll turn it over back to Karen now.
Thank you so much, Carla, and thank you, gentlemen. I think this has been, a very informative conversation, not just because we get to better understand what FEMA funding can provide, but if we are able to involve communities, build trust, build transparency, and understand that it's not just about a school building, but it's about children and the families as well. I also would love to say that although we cannot solve for all of the island's issue, we can consider what changes will have the biggest ripple effect on the trajectory of students and their families. And schools are the lever for change. Schools definitely are the lever for change. And so we are not a closing. Thank you again for your participation. FOMB is honored to be able to create the space for participants to learn and to ask questions, to learn from others' experiences and explore opportunities to improve education for all students on the island, for all students in Puerto Rico. Thank you all and have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.